staying to try and help negotiate that. So we are going to begin the hearing, and hopefully that will get worked out and the vote will be called. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and begin. So, good afternoon. The Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies will come to order. Chair Murray and Vice Chair Collins are working hard to return the committee to regular order, and I think, as Ranking Member Moran would agree, we both support and appreciate those efforts and look forward to actually writing our bill together, and we expect the chair and vice chair of the full committee to join the hearing at some point before it's over. I'm really pleased to welcome to today's hearing our Secretary Gina Raimondo, who is the Secretary of the Department of Commerce. We are here to review the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request for the department. At its core, the Department of Commerce mission is to help American workers and businesses thrive. The department relies on a talented workforce spread across all 50 states, every U.S. territory, and over 100 countries around the world. I want to thank the more than 40,000 department employees for their tireless work on behalf of our country. To maintain the department's diverse capabilities, this subcommittee must ensure that the department and its people have the resources they need to succeed. To that end, the fiscal year 2023 omnibus spending bill included $11.2 billion for the Department of Commerce. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget request for the department is $12.4 billion, a 10% increase compared to the fiscal year 2023 enacted level. This proposal builds on the department's ongoing work to help American workers and businesses compete. To do so, this budget proposes increasing funding for the National Institute of Standards and Technology by nearly $360 million. This investment would boost cutting-edge research and advanced manufacturing, while also addressing critical research facility needs, all to support well-paying American jobs and improve U.S. competitiveness. The budget also proposes a $455 million increase for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. With this investment, NOAA will advance the next generation of climate and weather satellites, which our nation relies on, to generate accurate forecasts that protect lives and property in New Hampshire and around the country. Building on the fiscal year 2023 omnibus investment in the Foreign Commercial Service, the fiscal year 2024 request proposes further enhancing our Foreign Commercial Service presence in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. This investment will help guide small and medium-sized businesses to identify growth opportunities abroad. These are all worthwhile investments that I'm really pleased to see included in this request. Over the last 2 years, Congress has given the department extensive responsibilities that extend beyond the annual appropriations process. In particular, through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Congress directed the department to ensure that every American is connected to high-speed internet. And through the CHIPS and Science Act, Congress gave the department the responsibility of bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. With respect to broadband, the department is targeting June 30th to distribute $42.45 billion in broadband equity, access, and deployment, or BEAD program, funding to states, the territories, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. This funding will support broadband infrastructure deployment with the goal of connecting all Americans to high-speed internet. And with respect to CHIPS, just a few months ago, the department released a notice of funding opportunities for the $39 billion Semiconductor Manufacturing Incentive Program. The department plans to release similar notices for the combined $13 billion in R&D and workforce development funding later this year. The stakes for these programs are high. If successful, broadband programs will finally allow all Americans to fully participate in today's society. And if successful, the CHIPS program will unleash the next generation of American innovation, protect our national security, and preserve our global economic competitiveness. I know I speak for all the members of this subcommittee when I say that we want these programs to succeed and we want to be helpful. We very much look forward to hearing updates from you, Madam Secretary, about these initiatives. As we all know, there's plenty to discuss today, so we very much look forward to your testimony, and I know that Senator Moran may have a statement when he joins us, but we will go ahead and ask you to begin.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Chair Shaheen and other members of the committee, I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about and have a discussion about President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Department of Commerce. And thank you for thanking the hardworking folks on the team, because they certainly deserve it. Thanks to your work and the President's leadership, major investments have come to the Department of Commerce from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the CHIPS and Science Act. And we are hard at work implementing those, and I expect we'll talk about that today. As you said, our goal is to make sure that America is positioned to compete and that we will be able to continue our leadership into the 21st century. The reality is global competition is fierce and getting more fierce, and so we can't take our foot off the gas. So today, I'm asking you to support the investments we're asking for in the fiscal 24 budget so that we can keep the momentum going. We'll continue to make those investments so that America can continue to be strong and compete. The budget requests $12.3 billion in discretionary funding and $4 billion in mandatory funding for the department. In the time permitting, just allow me please to highlight just a few of our priorities. First relates to manufacturing, which I know is a priority for many of you. We need to expand and improve manufacturing capacity and strength in the United States and all the innovation that flows from it. As a result, this budget calls for $1.6 billion to support the work of NIST, including $277 million for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. These MEP centers, and I know many of you are big supporters, have always been vital, more vital than ever, and we're looking to expand them, expand coordination with the private sector, and try to narrow the gaps in our supply chain. The budget also provides $98 million to expand NIST's role in Manufacturing USA, including $60 million in new competitive awards to enable existing Manufacturing USA institutes to promote domestic production of institute-developed technologies. Further, it proposes $713 million for ITA, International Trade Administration, including $26 million to establish a supply chain resiliency office in the Department of Commerce. We are reactive now with respect to supply chains. We need to get ahead of it. We need to invest so we can have proactive monitoring of supply chains and prevent future bottlenecks that we've lived through over these past couple of years. The budget also invests in programs to enable all Americans to have an opportunity to participate in the 21st century economy. As Senator Shaheen just said, the pandemic was just the latest in a series of economic shocks that have battered communities. Certain communities hit even harder, reduced wages, and in some cases eliminated local industries. That being said, throughout America, we have existing assets that with the right partnerships and investments can be leveraged and we can revitalize the economies of these communities. To that end, this budget invests $4 billion in mandatory funds and $50 million in discretionary funds to further fund the regional technology and innovation hubs, which will foster geographic diversity and innovation and create high-quality jobs in underserved or previously overlooked communities. It includes $200 million for the Recompete pilot program to provide grants to the most distressed communities. So these are communities that have persistently high unemployment rates and just need a focus and investment so that they can have a chance to thrive. Very importantly, this budget includes $100 million for the Good Jobs Challenge to fund employer-led workforce training systems and partnerships. I don't know about you, but I can't have a conversation with anyone in business today without being told about a labor shortage, lack of ability to hire, lack of ability to find trained workers. The Commerce Department used some of our ARP money to launch the Good Jobs Challenge. We were 12 times oversubscribed. So we're asking for another $100 million to do sector-based, applied, commerce-driven labor and training initiatives. I can't emphasize it enough. We're also asking for $110 million in the Minority Business Development Agency, including $20 million for rural business centers. So in closing, obviously I've only scratched the surface. I look forward to the discussion. But the President's budget is asking for smart, targeted investments that bolster our economic security and our national security, will make our supply chains more resilient, promote American manufacturing and innovation, and help more workers and businesses compete and win in the 21st century. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. And I'm going to start with where you left off at the end of your testimony talking about the labor shortage, because there is no doubt that that's one of the biggest concerns that I hear from every business I visit in New Hampshire. And one of the challenges, I think, is one that we talked about last year when you were here, and that is our visa programs. And while I recognize that is not under your purview, again, I would urge you to work within the administration to address what continues to be a shortage of legal immigration in this country that has not gotten better during the current administration. So again, we rely on many of those visa workers in New Hampshire for our farming, for the outdoor industry, tourism, and we just can't get enough people.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that. We've talked about it. I just spoke with the President's Chief of Staff a week ago, and I spoke as recently as last night with Secretary Blinken. We are committed to it. We know it's a problem, and I think the White House is planning to have an increased effort to really focus on it with the urgency that it requires.
thank you, I appreciate that. The NTIA announced a target date of June 30th, 2023 to announce state allocations for the BEAD broadband funding provided for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. The allocations are going to be based on the most up-to-date version of the FCC's National Broadband Map. Now, there are a lot of concerns about the quality of FCC's maps, including in New Hampshire, where we have real reservations about what the FCC is putting out. So given those concerns, how do you make the case that distributing the BEAD funds earlier rather than later is the best way forward? And why not wait for the maps to improve before allocating the funding?
Yeah. So it's obviously an excellent question, and one that we've given considerable thought to. There's a balance, because every day that we don't put the money out the door is a day that people don't have access to the internet. And there's, you and I, we've all visited people in rural areas who are suffering every day because they don't have the internet. So we feel a sense of urgency. And so between the time the bill passed to June 30th is more than 8 months. We're working very closely with the FCC. The FCC has the most granular data they ever have. It's household data, not just census tract data. And I myself, my whole team have reached out to states and industry to say, challenge the maps, tell us what you think is wrong. I would invite that to you, Senator. Like, I'll follow up with you, your governor. If you have issues, let us know. But I don't think we can delay, because if we delay, it's that, people don't have the internet.
So if we do have concerns about the maps that are being used, will there be a process whereby, you said to let you know, but will there be a process where we can come back to the department and say, on 125 and Epping in New Hampshire,
Yes.
the map is wrong, and how do we correct that?
So you could do that right now and anytime, which is to say, and I'm glad you brought that up, the FCC is running the process. The FCC is in charge of the maps. They're accepting challenges. You could go to them anytime, before June 30th, file a challenge and say XYZ address is wrong. And by the way, Senator Moran isn't here, but his staff did that in Kansas and allowed us to find, and Senator Wyden did too, thousands of people who the map said were covered and weren't. So FCC challenge process open now. I will follow up with you, but yes, we need to do that.
Thank you. Last year, Congress provided an initial appropriation of $500 million for the Regional Tech Hubs program that was authorized in the CHIPS and Science Act. That's designed to jumpstart the United States innovation capacity. And as Commerce implements that first round of competition and makes those initial awards, I'm concerned that the awards are made so that there is some equitable geographic distribution. So how is Commerce thinking about that when EDA evaluates where to locate these tech hubs? Are they looking also at EPSCoR states, for example, as a way to ensure that there's some geographic distribution to the tech hubs?
Yes. So I know what it's like to be from a small state that can be overlooked. So I am keenly focused on making sure that doesn't happen. I think it's 30% of the money will go to EPSCoR states. And the money isn't for, Silicon Valley, New York City, et cetera. The money is for other regions around the country that have excellent research universities and can contribute to technology that secures our national defense. My hope and hunch is that we're going to be oversubscribed. And, I hope you all will apply, because I think your states have great technology and innovation, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get outside of the 5 or 6 cities in America that have a lot of the money and tap into the talent, entrepreneurs, and research in these other places.
Well, thank you. I think the number of senators who are here shows the interest that exists out there for what the department is doing, and we're delighted that Senator Collins, who's vice chair of the Appropriations Committee, is here. Senator Collins.
Thank you very much. First, let me welcome you, Secretary Raimondo. It's good to see you. I want to follow up on the broadband issues that Senator Shaheen raised. As you well remember, the 3 of us were in charge of negotiating the broadband provisions of the infrastructure bill. I remember many late nights in which we did that, and I appreciate very much the efforts that you are making through NTIA to issue the notice of funding opportunity for $42.5 billion for the BEAD program. And there are some aspects of that notice that track the legislation that we wrote, but there are others that deviate from congressional intent. For example, the law states that any provider that can reliably provide 100 download, 20 upload megabytes per second is qualified to participate. And we wanted the program to be technology neutral, because what works in one part of Maine may not work in a part of New Hampshire. But the notice explicitly states that fiber is the only technology that can meet the definition of a priority project. In addition, states are required to consider climate change when awarding grants, despite there being no statutory basis for that requirement. Could you please update us on how you're addressing technical neutrality as well as labor requirements, climate mandates, and others that are not expressly authorized in the law? It's not as if we didn't have discussions in the group of negotiators about those issues.
Yeah. So nice to see you also, and it's good to be here. I do remember vividly negotiating with both of you, and I assure you that there are no requirements in this notice of funding opportunity at odds with statutory intent. We are open to all technologies. You know, we know that fiber is, as you know, the most reliable and kind of future-proof. Having said that, I was just in Portland, Oregon, with one of your colleagues, and I'm just using that as an example. We also know that some rural areas there, you know, fixed wireless will be will be the technology. So in no way are we saying it has to be fiber. We know some places will be fixed wireless. We want to make sure there's competition to make sure prices are kept low, and that people get, you know, the best service that they can that's appropriate for that area. In terms of other mandates, there are no other mandates. There's no labor requirements, there's no climate requirements, et cetera. You know, the other things you said. Essentially, what we are saying is we're asking for workforce plans, because right now there's 500,000 open construction jobs in America. We think that this broadband implementation is going to create about another 100,000 construction jobs. So we want to know, what are these companies doing to find and hire people to get the job done? So, you know, we are, in terms of, we're asking for transparency in the vendor process. You know, I think you sent me a letter saying that, you know, we're preferencing government-owned networks. That is not true. I will say that on the record. We are not preferencing government-owned networks. What we are saying is, show us transparency in the procurement process. Because if you pick a large ISP over something else, we just want to know why. So there's no rate regulation, as I promised you then, and I'll reiterate now. And I assure you, yeah, I want to hold everyone accountable, okay? Big ISPs shouldn't get a leg up. Government-owned shouldn't get a leg up. We're in this for the consumer. We'll hold them accountable, but we've imposed no additional requirements inconsistent with the statute.
Thank you. As I read it, it sounds like fiber is given a preference, so I'm glad to hear you say that it will be technology neutral. Let me switch to a different issue, and believe it or not, it's not going to be right whales this year.
I've been waiting for the right whale question.
Instead, it's going to be groundfish quotas. So,
Groundfish.
and I realize this may be a new issue that I'm putting on your radar. Last week, I was notified that the start of the Northeast Spring Bottom Trawl Survey will be delayed for the third time because NOAA's survey vessel, the Henry B. Bigelow, is not functioning properly. And I have a feeling this affects others of my colleagues. So we still don't know when this vessel will be functional, but according to NOAA staff, it can only be used for this survey through May 26, but it may not be fixed in time.
Okay.
So that means, according to NOAA, that NOAA will have to decrease the survey coverage, and that only 70% of the planned coverage area in southern New England, Georges Bank, and the Bank of Maine will be surveyed. So I recently met with a group of Maine fishermen who shared their great frustration about incomplete surveys, because if you don't have accurate surveys, you can't determine the quota. If you don't know how many fish are out there, you can't decide accurately what the quota is. And the fishermen are on the water every day. They have the best information about the state of the stock, and they're not involved in the surveys. So I would ask you, if your vessel is going to be out of commission, and as I said, this is the third time this has happened, I would ask you to consider collaborating with the fishermen who work in the Gulf of Maine and in these other areas on better data collection methods. They're willing to help. And they do know where the fish are. That's where they go.
Yeah.
And so I hope you will consider that, because otherwise we're going to end up with quotas that don't reflect the state of the stock.
Yeah, so I will look into this. I've taken notes. You're exactly right about the surveys, how vital they are. We had a lot of problems in COVID staying on top of the surveys on time. We're mostly caught up. I regret that we're not caught up in Maine. So let me look into it and get back to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
If we're allowed to collaborate in the way you suggest with the fishermen, I think it's a smart idea, but let me get into the details.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murray. We're delighted that the chair of the Appropriations Committee is here.
And the vice chair as well.
Yes, I already announced the vice chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Chair Shaheen and our ranking member Moran, because really as we continue moving ahead in our bipartisan work to return to regular order for the first time in years and pass these funding bills in a responsible, timely way, these hearings that we are doing are really critical to get our country and our communities the resources we need to build an economy that gives our workers and small business opportunities to grow and thrive, and to keep our families safe and on solid financial footing, and keep our economy competitive on the world stage. Because when we compete with our adversaries, it's not just a matter of who spends the most on defense, it's a matter of who has the strongest supply chains, who supports workers and growing businesses most, who makes sure our communities have the high-speed internet they need to do just about anything in the 21st century, and who is on the cutting edge of technology, advanced manufacturing, green energy, quantum computing, and more, not to mention who has the strongest trade relationships with our allies. In Washington State, the strength of our economy is really directly tied to our nation's ability to ship and sell everything from our seafood to our apples and food and produce all over the world. And the Department of Commerce is absolutely crucial to all of that. The department helps us understand weather patterns and disasters that threaten our communities and our agricultural production and fisheries on the front line of the climate crisis. It works to strengthen our trade partnerships and provide more markets for American goods. It is closing the digital divide and connecting our rural and underserved communities to each other, to our nation and the rest of the world. This is something I pushed very hard to fund, and we have to continue to make progress on that. The department is also using resources we provided in the CHIPS and Science Act to bring manufacturing jobs in things like quantum computing and chip manufacturing to states like mine, because we've got to make sure the jobs of the future are here in America and not shipped overseas. And the Inflation Reduction Act is actually ushering in a boom in green manufacturing for batteries and electrical vehicles and more. We know China is making investments in many of these same industries and trying to get the upper hand. So if we want to not just compete, but to lead the world, we cannot let our investments fall behind or fall victim to partisan potshots. So I'm really glad today to have this opportunity to discuss with Secretary Raimondo how her department's work helps strengthen our economy here at home and our position on the world stage. And I look forward to working with all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make the investments that we need here. So, Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. Let me start with an issue important to my state, and that is salmon. Salmon are really foundational to Washington State's economy and cultural heritage. Salmon recovery remains an issue of really critical importance. We have built on this work through the appropriations process, and I'm very proud of the supplemental investments we were able to secure in the bipartisan infrastructure law and in the Inflation Reduction Act to really support those efforts. NOAA plays an integral role in this work, from the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund to implementation of the Pacific Salmon Treaty, to the Mitchell-Hacked hatcheries, permitting, stock assessments, and has really proposed a suite of actions to help recover these endangered runs. Can you talk to us about how NOAA uses this year's budget to further aid salmon recovery and meet the urgency of this moment?
Yes, thank you, Senator, and it's good to see you, and thank you for your support. As you know, we're very, very focused on this, and I've had the opportunity to talk to you. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've already sent out $100 million in funding to support Pacific salmon habitat restoration in Washington. So of the bill, $100 million for habitat restoration in your state. The budget that we have before you includes a request for just over $150 million for Pacific salmon and NOAA fisheries. So that's, a significant amount of money. I would ask for your support for that in this budget. In the past month, I have myself sat down with a number of the leaders in the tribes in the Pacific Northwest, Nisqually and Lummi tribes. I'm hearing about it. I've been out with Senator Cantwell to your state. And so we will continue to work hand in glove with your state, your tribes, you, and the community to conduct the research we need, the monitoring we need, the data we need, but also investments to sustain the habitat and the hatchery.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm going to ask you another question that is really becoming an increasing problem in the Pacific Northwest, actually, I think along the whole West Coast, and that's the issue of European green crab. This is a globally damaging invasive species. It has become established in many temperate coastal zones worldwide, including the Pacific Northwest. This is a major predator of our clams, our mussels, our oysters. It damages the eelgrass that is essential habitat for Dungeness crab and Pacific salmon. Our state and local and tribal governments have invested their resources to combat this invasive species. I was pleased to see some funding from the Climate Ready Coast program go to help the Lummi Nation's efforts. But the federal government has to start playing a part in this here. How can NOAA help with efforts to mitigate the impacts of coastal aquatic invasive species like the European green crab?
I will say this committee really keeps me on my toes between the ground fish, the right whales, the salmon, and now the European green crab.
Yeah, I went out and saw it a few weeks ago, and I was just stunned at the invasiveness of this in my state.
That's amazing. Well, due to you and your leadership, it has risen in our priority of focus for NOAA. And as I understand it, we're working closely with the new management and control, with your state and Fish and Wildlife, also Fish and Wildlife Service, to outline new strategies for detection, monitoring, and importantly, control. So I expect to be able to have more updates for you, but thank you for
Great. Let's stay in touch on that. It's really incredibly damaging. I have another question on the Digital Equity Act and broadband. I will submit it for the record, so thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Murray and Vice Chair Collins. And Senator Moran has arrived, and the vote has been called. So, Senator Moran, I'm going to turn the gavel over to you to make your statement. And
I would yield to somebody who hasn't voted, if that's helpful.
Senator Fisher, then.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and nice to see you, Ranking Member Moran. Secretary Raimondo, thank you for being here today. Your testimony noted the Department of Commerce's work to support trusted supply chains. You also commented last week about the department's Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund, highlighting the promising efforts to advance Open RAN technology for secure wireless network growth. But you noted that it's a long project. It'll take a decade or more. As you know, there is a funding shortfall in the FCC's program to rip out and replace high-risk Chinese network equipment. I remain very concerned about the immediate national security risks that this presents for our communications infrastructure. In the short term, do you agree that the rip and replace funding shortfall is an emergency that we need to address now?
I do. I think rip and replace is essential for security, as you say. Yes,
Thank you. I also wanted to touch on the department's probe evaluating the effect of Huawei network equipment near military installations. News reports previously indicated that this probe began in 2021. Can you tell me anything about the investigation in this setting?
I cannot, but I'd be happy to follow up with you.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about the export licensing process that's led by the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security. The FY24 budget requests ask for increased funding to support export administration. However, I've heard concerns from ammunition and firearm industry that their products have been subject to extra stringent 100% end-user checks, even if a customer had recently been vetted by the department. This slowed the approval of their export licenses, and in the process, it hurt their manufacturing businesses. Madam Secretary, if a company has sold the same product to the same customer for many years, and that customer has been vetted many times before, why is the government spending time and money checking them yet again?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact company and such you're referring to, and once again, I'd be happy to follow up with you. But I would say two things. One, things change, right? I mean, our job is to protect the American people. I don't know who they're selling to. I don't know the circumstances, but I do know that we live in a fiercely competitive world, and whether it's China or Russia or Iran, things change, and so we have a job to continuously evaluate. Also, when it comes to firearms, you know, we have to make certain that they're not going to get into the wrong hands. I will tell you, we apply, we're fair. We endeavor to be fair. There's no judgment that's not based on the facts, and so I'm happy to get the details and look into it for you.
Okay, we will get you those details, and I look forward to hearing some reasoning there, because what was presented to me I found very concerning, so I'd
Okay.
like to check that with you. Would you be able to provide some data about the processing times for different export license categories and the staff resources that were dedicated to specific categories of products?
Of course.
Okay. And does the firearm and ammunition industry receive a heightened level of security when their export licenses are being reviewed compared to other industries?
You know, here's what I would say. As I said before, firearms are, you know, deadly weapons. We have to take caution appropriately to make sure that they're not getting into the wrong hands. So if we apply the appropriate level of scrutiny to, you know, keep people safe and make sure they're used not by any of our adversaries. So to the extent we apply extra scrutiny, that's why.
Okay. There's been mention of the BEAD program before. I'll submit a comment for the record. I'm getting close to my time here, so thank you very much.
Senator Fisher, thank you. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Secretary, for being with us today. A couple of things. Broadband's a big thing in rural West Virginia. It's rural America, as you know. And just a little bit, if you can tell me about the middle mile funding. That's the one that's causing us a lot of problems. And also the extra cost that it goes in the mountainous terrain. To take, you know, our cost is much higher for us to reach our citizens than it is in the flatter terrain. So about middle mile and how we're able to get that deployed.
So we're working so hard to get the middle mile money out by the end of June. That would be my goal. And I know how important it is for you. As for the extra cost, you're exactly right. And there, you know, as you know, there's a high cost kind of carve out additional money that probably due to your efforts in the bill. And we're working with the FCC to define exactly what qualifies and how much money a state like West Virginia or frankly Alaska might get due to that. but we are highly conscious of the fact that it's going to cost more money in a rural place, and that's what the money's for.
But our other concern is basically, are small providers being squeezed out by the large guys? When they come in, the larger, I think something you have to be aware of.
Yeah.
They will squeeze them hard and say, oh, yeah, we're going to do that. The local people and the smaller providers are getting to us quicker, can do a better job quicker. I'm sure, I don't know, in Alaska and all the other rural areas, they know the terrain, they can get there better and quicker than the big boys coming in and say, oh, we'll take care of
Yeah.
all this. So if
You
we
know,
can protect that.
You've talked to me about that before. We'll work with, as you say, the little guys. I mean, we'll work with whoever we think can get the job done efficiently, effectively, and, you know, as cheaply as possible for consumers.
Well, please, we'll work with you on that. We need your help. Several years ago, Chinese firm bought British Steel out of insolvency. Since that time, steel producers in the U.S. have repeatedly expressed concern regarding the subsidies it might be receiving. It's the audit of UK steel producers required by the U.S.-UK tariff agreement was carried out, and I encourage you to remain vigilant. What actions is the department taking to minimize the effects of the transshipment and dumping practice utilized by the Chinese government through different, basically, ghost, if you will, ghost companies?
Listen, I'm as concerned as you are. I was involved in negotiating that settlement with the UK. The President said it's important to mend fences with our allies, and we did that appropriately. But the company you speak of has Chinese ownership.
Absolutely.
So as part of the deal, we negotiated, and I insisted that they are audited by us, by an independent party. We need full access to their books, and we are on it vigilantly to make sure that there's no, Chinese subsidy.
Well, I have a
that
company called
disadvantages
West
us.
Virginia Steel. I'll be happy to give you all the information they have
Yeah.
and the unfair competition they're receiving from them.
I
It's
would
just
like to have
awful.
it.
Well,
I would
I'll
like
get
to
it
have
to
it.
you.
Get it to us, because
And
we
with
want to
that,
be
I'm
on it.
holding to, Senator Schatz told me to be quick and brief, and I am holding to it. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Good to see you.
I'll go to Senator Murkowski. You voted. You want to? I have voted. You want to ask a question, or should I go to Senator? Have you voted, Senator Hagerty? All right. In the bipartisan spirit of this subcommittee, the senator from Hawaii.
There we go.
Thank you, Vice Chairman, and I appreciate your forbearance. I'll be as quick as I can. Secretary, thank you for being here. Hawaii's longline fishery single-handedly makes Honolulu one of the biggest, one of the top 10 producing fishing ports. These fishers are the largest food producer in the state, and the fleet of 145 active vessels is primarily composed of small businesses. This fleet ensures that the United States is a participant in international fisheries management for the Western and Central Pacific, and gives our nation another way to have influence and presence in the Indo-Pacific region. But the longline fishery is facing a number of issues that add up to trouble. Quota negotiations at the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Management Council, observer coverage for the fleet, and the lack of science and data on false killer whales. Do I have your commitment to work these issues?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all. I just want our staffs to get together, and I've been involved in fisheries management now for half of my lifetime, and so I know these are complicated, and you have to learn a whole community and a whole ecology and a whole economy region by region, but we want your engagement here. It's a sustainable fishery. I'm not always in agreement with them on policy, but I think they have some very strong points here, and I'm a little worried for the health of the fishery, and I'd like to engage with you.
Yeah. So I am by no means an expert on longline fishing, but I do know how important it is to Hawaii. And I've learned more about how important it is to your economy, to your culture, et cetera. So I guarantee you we'll get more engaged.
Thank you very much. I want to talk to you about the tribal broadband ongoing funding. According to the FCC, only 79% of the 4 million Americans living on tribal lands have access to broadband, compared to 96% of the rest of the population. That means that there are roughly 850,000 Americans living on tribal lands without broadband access. The FCC's own estimates have shown that it can cost about $5,000 to connect rural unserved homes. That suggests it'll cost around $4 billion to connect everybody. Congress has provided $3 billion in funding. Do we need more resources, or are we at the point where we now have to just match the resources with the need?
The latter, and here's why. There's the tribal money that you referenced, which is not enough, to meet all the tribal needs. However, in the BEAD funding, some of that
Tribes are eligible.
Tribes, some of that will go to the tribes. So I do believe we have enough funding if you look at the whole package of the 50 billion. The challenge, and we're doing our best, and I'd welcome your feedback, is like working with the tribes to figure out exactly what the needs are, what kind of technology will make it happen, et cetera. But I don't believe that's a resource issue.
I think you're right, but I think we don't quite know that yet. So
Yeah.
let's both keep an open mind, especially as we deploy the non-tribal money, and especially since some of the states are going to be in control of it. So there could be difficulty in getting it exactly where it's needed. And so let's just track that. Finally, there's a National AI Advisory Committee, and we've established it, but it doesn't have dedicated funding and dedicated staff. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the need to staff up in this area. Obviously, everybody's very acutely aware of the opportunity and the challenges related to AI. And I think the government has to build some capacity to process the policy questions in front of us. And at a minimum, a little bit of money and a little bit of staff seems to be a good place to start.
I couldn't agree more. I would actually love to talk to you about this when we have more than a minute and 10 seconds, because I actually met yesterday with that advisory board. They were in town. They produced their draft report. They'll have their final report to you, I think, in about a month or so. They're doing incredible work. But the challenges coming down the pike with respect to AI and generative AI, huge opportunity, incredibly exciting. But the privacy issues, the deep fake issues, the delusion issues, civil rights issues are massive, and we have to get on it with urgency. And so, of course, I would support additional engagement and staff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you. Secretary, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your time that we've spent together. The implementation of the CHIPS and Science Act is a significant, perhaps national security and economic game changer for our country. You have very serious responsibilities that Senator Shaheen and I and others on this subcommittee want to make certain that you have the tools to do so. But I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the future of our nation in significant part rests upon the success of this program, CHIPS and Science. And so in addition to offering our help, I wish you well. I appreciate your leadership in this regard. I want to talk a moment about tech hubs. The Regional Technology and Innovation Hub, Tech Hub program is designed to do just what I described. And it's involving the development of clusters of business, academic institutions, and industry to accelerate innovation and technology deployment throughout our country. My question is, how will the applications be ranked or compared with regards to proposals that develop new capacity within the region versus proposals that are designed to capitalize on a community's existing expertise to develop global leadership in a distinct economic area?
Yeah. So nice to see you. It was great to be with you in Kansas.
Thank you.
I would say the tech hubs, there has to be some existing like bolus of activity. There has to be something. The money isn't to begin from whole cloth. Without saying that I'm going to guarantee that there's going to be a tech hub in Kansas, I would say based upon what I saw there, that's the kind of thing we're looking for, which is to say there's something there already, right? There's a expertise in a technology, there's a research university, there's a workforce, and you're on the cusp of like world-class research in an area relative to national defense, and we want to invest in that to stimulate that or advance that.
I appreciate that answer very much. In the CHIPS program, what role do you see small and medium-sized chip semiconductor, excuse me, I misspoke, medium-sized semiconductor businesses in their participation in the chip program? How do they stand to help us increase our resiliency within the domestic semiconductor industry?
Yeah. Highly, we need them. We need them. I can report to you that we asked for statements of interest just, I guess, a couple months ago. We weren't sure what we would receive. We already have over 200 statements of interest from companies of all sizes, and only about half of them are fabs, foundry companies. There are big and small in the supply chain, et cetera. So I would say often it's the little companies that have the most innovation or have a niche product. So I would say apply, and we want to work with you.
Again, thank you. Let me see if you have any concerns. The release guidance states that it expects that most CHIP direct funding awards will range between 5 and 15% of the total project expenditures. Does that limitation on direct funding, does that negatively impact the opportunity for those small and medium-sized companies?
No, that's a range. The truth of it is, that is a range, and that's not a rule, and we need to be flexible to get the job done.
I think that's my questions at the moment. I may have a second round if we have one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you.
Hello.
Let me start by thanking you and your team at NOAA for your efforts to disperse the grants to help states and localities deal with flooding and other climate-related costs. And as I said in our exchange, we had a very good discussion with the folks at NOAA with respect to the Maryland programs. I'd like to turn to a couple issues regarding export controls, but before I do that, I just want to thank you and your team. You've been the key players when it comes to spurring a new generation of innovation in the United States, implementing the CHIPS and Science Act, and we're already seeing it make a huge difference around the country, and I would argue a good signal around the world.
Thank you.
So as we make sure that we're at the cutting edge here at home, we also need to make sure that we are, I think, constraining the export of our most sensitive technologies that could be used by competitors or adversaries for military purposes. If you could give us an update, first of all, on the impact of the export controls on Russia. I think we hear often about the banking sanctions, but just as important and maybe more important over time has been the grinding effect of export controls, but also talk to the efforts of the administration to apply those export controls in concert with our European allies, the EU, and our other democratic partners in East Asia, South Korea, Japan, others, with respect to very high-end chips, including the recent agreement between the United States, the Netherlands, and Japan. If you could talk about those and let us know if you have the resources that you need at the department to make sure that we can really implement these policies.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. Nice to see you. And thank you for the kind words. I was just prior to this with President Biden in a bilateral with President Yoon from South Korea, and we talked about exactly what you said, working together and unleashing private capital into the chip industry, which has already started to happen in very significant ways. So anyway, we're working hard at it. With respect to Russia, we moved with alacrity to put together a coalition of 39 countries, and it's holding firm. I can tell you that. It is holding firm. We are working daily with those other countries and in our own system here on enforcement. The team actually has just launched a strike force with the Department of Justice. We are obsessed with enforcement. It's really hard. Russia has decades of practice building networks all around the world to get around sanctions and export controls. The short answer to your question, though, is we are having a very significant impact. We have, I think more than 500 companies that we've put on the entity list. We've stopped hundreds of shipments and hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment going into Russia. And we see it. They're struggling to get spare parts. They're struggling to get Semiconductors, we know that they continue to work with other countries to take the electronic the electronic control panels off of dishwashers and the like to put into their equipment. So it is a vigilance that we have to continue with, but we're having a very significant effect. With respect to export controls more broadly, the budget before you requests a significant increase for BIS for exactly this. You know, Senator Fisher was talking about China before. Like, the threats are real. You know, since I have been secretary, not very long, we've put hundreds of new Chinese companies on the list. About a quarter of the Chinese companies on the entity list were put there in my tenure. And we have to continue. So we need the resources in order to be able to protect America and to protect our technology.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. I know that you're vigilant about this, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on the resource front. Just in your closing minutes here, NIST, of course, plays a vital role in your efforts to implement the bill, the CHIPS and Science Bill. We're proud to have them headquartered in Maryland. There are lots of facility requirements, a lot of aging facilities, and I know you've got monies here in your budget, $262 million. I guess my question very quickly, yes or no, is whether you think that will be sufficient to bring those facilities up to standards or whether it's just a start.
I think it's just a start, a significant start. I have visited there myself, and I know you have. You can see it. And by the way, it's the loss of productivity, safety and productivity. That's our crown jewels to compete, and it's not up to where it needs to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Chair Shaheen. I appreciate your calling this hearing. It's good to see you, Secretary. Secretary, I'd like to come back to a topic that you were just discussing with Senator Van Hollen, and that has to do with China and your efforts there. Just yesterday, I, along with 8 other senators, 2 on this committee, Senator Britt and Senator Rubio, sent you a letter urging the Department of Commerce to take action against China's cloud service providers. They're supporting China's military, security, and intelligence services, and also they're collaborating with entities that are aiding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Madam Chair, I'd like to submit this letter for the record, if I may.
Without objection.
Thank you. The examples that we provide in the letter show that China's military-civil fusion strategy is alive and well. Given China's laws that compel every Chinese citizen and Chinese company to assist in national security or intelligence work, it should be common sense to deny U.S. exports to these countries. I think you know the Chinese national security law. Yet companies like Alibaba Cloud that are not on the entity list still have access to U.S. technology and exports and even have operations here in the United States. We have an opportunity to do better here, and I think we must. My first question, Secretary, is do you believe that China-based cloud service providers like Huawei Cloud and Alibaba Cloud pose a threat to U.S. national security?
I believe that they could, yes.
Indeed, I agree with you. Given the far reach of China's national security-related laws and their military-civil fusion strategy, do you agree that the PRC cloud service providers that operate in the United States pose a threat to our national and our economic security?
As I said, they could. Let me say, I'm in broad agreement with you. I mean, I received your letter yesterday. I've only read it. I haven't had time to look into these companies. But I think my record in this regard is crystal clear, right? The evidence is clear. I've put over 200 Chinese companies on the entity list in my tenure, and we are actively, constantly investigating additional threats, and if and as we think companies need to go onto the list, I will not hesitate.
I'm going to strongly encourage you to take a hard look at the letter. Thank you for reviewing it.
We will.
These are companies that also should be included, and they pose, in my view, very significant risks.
I hear you loud and clear.
8 of my colleagues agree with that. As we just discussed, the PRC has created an entire system through its domestic laws, its industrial policies, and its development strategies that make it next to impossible for U.S. businesses to know their customer and for the Commerce Department to effectively vet problematic end users in China. According to a 2022 Congressional Research Service report on export controls and China, U.S. exports to China amounted to $124.6 billion in 2020. Of that $124.6 billion, an estimated 18% of it, that's $22.6 billion, involve dual-use technologies that are on the Commerce Control List, and those are subject to controls. but the Bureau of Industry and Security required licenses for just 2.1% of these Commerce Control List technology exports. In other words, the vast majority of technology exports under the Commerce Control List, roughly 98% of them, or $22 billion worth of exports, went to China without license. This is concerning to me, given the circumstances, and so I want to come back to a piece of legislation, the Export Control Reform Act of 2018. That gives congressional committees of jurisdiction authority to request export licensing data from the Commerce Department. As ranking member of the Banking Subcommittee on National Security and International Trade and Finance, I plan to make use of this authority to ensure effective oversight of our exports to China and to ensure that dual-use technologies aren't sent to China and utilized in some means for their military modernization activities. And, Secretary, I think I know where you'll be on this, but I want to assure that you'll fully cooperate with this committee that we're in today and with the Banking Committee's National Security Committee that I also serve on to provide export licensing data in a transparent and a totally, in a timely manner when it's lawfully requested by me serving on this committee.
Absolutely. I mean, of course.
I look forward to working with you on this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Haggerty. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chair Shaheen. Thank you, Secretary Raimondo. It is always a delight to be with you. I think you literally have the best job in government. A department that includes NOAA and NIST and the Patent and Trademark Office and the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. What a garden of policy delights you get to frolic in each and every day. I thought I'd try and get a good smile out of you about this. And your budget request would continue to invest very broadly across a wide range of things that each of us see value in our states. I'll speak for myself that I see value in my state. Strengthening manufacturing, protecting inventions and innovation, making our country stronger by making it more secure. So let me ask 3 quick questions, if I could, about different topics. First, implementing the CHIPS and Science Act. I think the terrific men and women of the department are doing a great job in implementing. You recently said that over $100 billion in new investments in American manufacturing facilities has just been announced in the last year. Your opening testimony highlighted the importance of NIST's Manufacturing USA program. I could not agree more. As you know, there happens to be one headquartered at the University of Delaware, which brings together 200 public, private, and academic partners from most of the states of our country. There's $60 million in your proposal for building test beds at Manufacturing USA facilities, which will be critical to realizing the promise of training the manufacturing workforce of the future and demonstrating new technologies. What do you think are the best ways that we can advance manufacturing, ensure that the Department of Commerce-led Manufacturing USA institutes flourish, and what role do you think that $60 million plays in facilitating that? That's my first question.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for your strong support of Manufacturing USA. As you say, there's one that under Commerce, and it happens to be in Delaware. What you just spoke of with the test beds speaks to a larger focus of ours, which is around workforce development and workforce training. We have a huge issue in this country, which is that we don't have the trained workers to do the manufacturing. Senator Reid and I have talked about this in the past with the industrial base. Due to the fact that manufacturing has atrophied over years in this country, all of the tool and die experts, machinists, chemists, et cetera, are aging or aren't around. So we need to train them. And on these test beds, we plan to really lean into a lot more worker training applied so that we have, the skilled workforce to do that. The other thing we're going to do, I mentioned in my opening comments and with Senator Shaheen, we've got to focus on getting more of our supply chain in the U.S., which means manufacturing, including small. And so a lot of that means helping the smaller manufacturers to be more digitally equipped and use of technology. And so we're working with them to do that so they can be cutting edge.
Our states, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Delaware, were among the earliest in our country to have manufacturing. We have small, distributed, high-skilled, high-capability manufacturers, often integrated with the defense industry. And so I hope that the NIST and the Manufacturing USA institutes that are part of the DoD and DOE networks will continue on the trajectory you mentioned. One other question, I recognize I'm going to run out of time. I chaired an IP subcommittee hearing last week on the competitive threats to our economic leadership, and I highlighted China's abusive practices with respect to standard essential patents, SEPs, which are critical for advances, things like 5G. I have real concerns about the European Commission's new SEP regulations, which I understand are set to publish today. And if it goes in a certain direction, that resolution will just validate China's abusive royalty-setting practices and harm our patent owners. There may be room to engage with the European Commission to discuss the unintended, let's hope, consequences of their regulation. I just wondered what your position is on this regulation and whether you'll work with me to communicate the potential harm to our global competitiveness if this is adopted by our European partners.
Yeah, we share your concerns. I think we very much share your concerns, and I will follow up with you. I had a team in Brussels last week expressing our concerns, and I'll be in Sweden in a few weeks for the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. I will put this in our discussion, so we should get together before that.
Please, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary, good to see you. Thank you for all that you're doing. Nice to talk about fish with so many of my colleagues here, so this is great. You have a focus there at NOAA with regards to climate resilient fisheries. And believe me, we're a state that is looking at the impacts of climate and what's happening with our fisheries. Great concern and angst and really crisis for many. I was at a regional advisory council for a fisheries board, and I was told by one of the elders there, if we don't fish, we don't eat. Because there is no readily affordable, available grocery store. The fish is their sustenance. So it's important to us. And so one of the tools that we have here at the federal level is the funding that comes with the fisheries surveys. I've talked about them a lot. I think it's probably one of the most important tools that we have in terms of understanding what's going on with our fisheries. So NOAA is requesting base funding of $208 million for fisheries data surveys and assessment. This is an increase of $5 million from last year. Everyone's coming to me and saying, we need more. We need to know that we are doing enough. Do you think this is adequate, given what we're facing, and I know we're facing it in other parts of the country as well?
I do. We do. I know, and we've talked about, especially during COVID, we had a lot of challenges in Alaska with the surveys.
Right.
I believe we're out of the woods with respect to that, and our fish surveys are on track to be completed in fiscal '23 on time. So I understand how important it is, and we do think it is enough.
So we also are looking at different ways that we're doing surveys, and of course, the vessel-based surveys are very important. There's certainly plans out there for additional data collection through uncrewed vehicles, buoys, but I think there's a recognition that there's not an absolute substitute for the vessel-based surveys. So what I'm hoping to be assured from you is that the vessel-based fisheries surveys will continue as needed and increase as needed. And then an added question to that is, do you have the vessels that you need in order to do that?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
But let me fully
Can you confirm,
look into it and come back.
Confirm that? Because again, making sure that we've got that is absolutely key. Many have also talked to you about broadband equity and the BEAD program. You were mentioning to Senator Manchin the rural needs, and of course, we're about as rural as you're going to find in America. Our state is anticipating the BEAD allocations at the end of June. We're also very cognizant that the high cost set aside, again, is going to be super important to us. So we're trying to understand exactly what that means. The state of Alaska has requested some information about the definition. They haven't gotten much substantive response. They were told that there would be no public comment on the proposed formula. So I don't know whether you can give me some input in terms of how the formula, how how the formula is actually developed, the weighting of it, the sources for it, whether or not there are additional considerations. For instance, in Alaska, you've got limited construction seasons that drive up your costs. You've got shipping and freight costs that don't compare to anybody else, which add to your construction costs. So are things like this factored into this high-cost definition?
Let me say a couple things. Yes. Also, the high cost set aside was precisely intended for places like Alaska.
Good.
That is the purpose of it, and we are working right now with the FCC to finalize the definition of what, high cost will be and how the allocation will work. We will have that done soon and be able to advise you of that, obviously, well in advance of the June 30th deadline of when the allocation will be sent out.
But that won't necessarily be input from the states. It will be you telling the rural states, this is how we have defined it?
Yes. So that's what I was going to get to.
Okay.
So we're working with the FCC now on that exact definition to be consistent with what's in the legislation. The entire purpose is for, Alaska is the poster child of why this exists. And we want the feedback of the officials in the state of Alaska. So as a result of this, we will proactively seek their feedback. And then they will be, told what their high cost allocation will be on top of, the BEAD allocation, which is coming out pursuant to formula on June 30th.
Okay. They've asked me to just, again, make sure that there's some way that they're given that level of transparency, I guess, in terms of how that definition is arrived at. But thank you for the assurance that you've had exactly rural states like Alaska in mind when you're crafting this.
Absolutely. But we'll follow up with them.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Reid.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. First, let me begin, Madam Secretary Bay, commending you for your extraordinary leadership in so many areas. One in particular we are grateful for, that is the Atlantic Marine Operations Center relocation to Newport, Rhode Island. Not only the facility, but the vessels will, I think, add to a concentration of sophisticated oceanographic activity with the Narragansett Bay campus of URI, with Woods Hole in Massachusetts. So it could not have been done without you, and I thank you very much. Let me return to an issue of the tech hubs in EPSCoR, which the Chairman Shaheen brought up. Under the statute, 1/3 of the designated tech hubs must be from an EPSCoR state. But the question that I will raise is, unless I think some of these smaller states have support through strategy implementation awards, that they might get a token recognition, et cetera, but they won't get something that's comparable to what they can bring to the table in terms of their talent and everything else, simply because they won't have that. Will EDA be looking to make sure that that there's a fair chance through assistance and advice that all of the selected tech hubs can be competitive?
Yes. So let me just take a second to talk about this because, again, not just because we're both from Rhode Island, but as a governor of a small state with a lot of potential, I understand this. It was always hard for us to get the technical resources together to put in an application that would compete with even Massachusetts or certainly California, et cetera. So the way we're planning to do it is exactly that. There'll be an open application, we'll have designations, and then there will be planning grants. So we'll provide a certain amount of money so that places like New Hampshire, like Rhode Island, et cetera, will have technical assistance from us, but also money to hire whatever consultants or such, and then enable them to put their best foot forward. I will say, I think I said this to Senator Shaheen, I think we're going to be oversubscribed. This is meant to be a pilot program. So what I'm trying to do is use this to identify really all the fantastic opportunities and then help a few to bubble up to the top, but then, I hope there's future funding.
A related question, Madam Secretary, is that I can assume from your response that EDA will be providing practical assistance in the application process to
Yes.
all these tech hubs, because many times, and again, your experience as the governor of a small state, is that they have the talent but just don't have the expertise to fill out the forms and do all the the stuff that has to be done.
It's very true, and yes,
Thank
we will
you.
do that.
One of the other areas I wanted to highlight is with respect to EDA. It's been a very powerful organization. There are numerous projects that I can point to at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, for example, that were EDA funded, that provided sort of a catalyst for other investments, et cetera. And now that is just a really remarkable business center. But the question is, does EDA have the enough resources to do all the things they'll be tasked and to continue to do what they have been doing, really helping out?
You know, I would say no. I mean, we're grateful for the support, to be clear. But as I mentioned, Good Jobs Challenge, just one example. It's a sector-based job training initiative where you put the businesses first and they commit to hire. We had 12 times the demand for the supply, right? We put $500,000 out there. We had almost $7 billion. The same thing for the Build Back Better Regional Challenge. We were overrun. Candidly, Rhode Island had a fantastic application that didn't get funded. We just didn't have enough money. So I think what you're seeing now, and the president believes deeply in this, we want place-based economic development, investments in communities, maybe former manufacturing communities. And if we had more, I have no doubt we could put it to good use and put Americans to work.
And that would be in the form not only the programmatic grants, but the support for EDA in general.
Exactly right. That's exactly
Thank you very
right.
much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's wonderful to see you today.
Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for being here and for testifying in front of this committee. Your department has a wide variety of missions that are important to Alabama. One mission that Alabama especially appreciates and would like to see improvement on is weather forecasting and severe weather tracking. Severe weather events, specifically tornadoes, upend and unfortunately take lives in our state every year. One way to address this critical issue would be through better radar coverage, specifically in West Alabama. In conversations with your NOAA staff about how we could get better coverage in that area, they've noted that radar is important, but only one piece of a larger weather forecasting ecosystem. I agree with your staff on this point. I understand the importance of satellites, models, and surface weather data collection as it builds a rich data environment for weather prediction and preparedness. That's why I am fighting for us to fund an expansion of South Alabama Mesonet, and that is why I'm concerned that the department's budget request proposal cuts this program. This is hard, and you look at this, and it's only one program designed to help Alabamians to understand, to plan, and to prepare for severe weather, and we want to make sure that it's funded adequately. For example, the department's proposed budget also cuts the Cooperative Institute for Research and Operations in Hydrology, which is based at the University of Alabama and works with institutes from Hawaii to Vermont to Canada to research and develop state-of-the-art science, weather, and water analysis, forecast, and guidance, as well as the delivery of those services. Additionally, the budget proposes cutting the Vortex program, which aims to reduce the loss of life and economic damage caused by tornadoes. Madam Secretary, I understand you care deeply about these communities that benefit and expect to benefit from these programs. So despite the proposed budget cuts, I was hopeful that we could both agree that these programs are important for the Department of Commerce to continue implementing so that Americans are warned as early as possible of impeding severe weather.
Yes. So let me say a couple things. First of all, I share the concern. I really do. In fact, just the other day, I was on the phone with a member of my team who lives in Arkansas, and her house was destroyed by a tornado. She had to crunch down in the bathtub, and I was just calling to check in on her. So I want to work with you on it. We are totally, totally committed to accurate data and high-quality forecasts. There's money in the budget for new weather satellites, and I want to work with you on that. You mentioned the Vortex program. We are requesting, I think, $7 million more. $7 million more to support research for tornado warning and forecast information in the Southeast. So the budget is asking for more money for Southeast tornado work. The reason I got comfortable with the cut to the Vortex is because we got additional money last year, and so we feel with that increase, it was okay. We'd have adequate resources even with the cut this year. Last week at my House hearing, Congressman Adderholt brought this up.
He did.
And as a result of that, I've already had my deputy secretary sit down with the head of the Weather Service to start working on this.
Wonderful.
The challenge is the lower quality, lower ferocity storms and tornadoes.
Right.
And so we have to work together on that.
Yeah, and I am so grateful to your response last week to Congressman Adderholt. I know this is also particularly important to Congresswoman Sewell, and so I am hopeful that you will continue to work with us in a bipartisan, bicameral way to make sure that we have the resources we need. To your earlier point about speaking to the young woman that you work with in Arkansas, I have a very similar situation, so this is personal for me. April 27th, 2011, so tomorrow will be 12 years that an E4 tornado hit Tuscaloosa. And a dear friend of mine, two of my sisters, my husband, and my children, by the grace of God, are somehow here today. Had it not been for an incredible meteorologist and really good radar and them warning us in the way that they did, we would not be here. I know firsthand that minutes matter, but so do seconds. And James Spann in Alabama, he's a legend. We have great meteorologists all across our state, but we often say when he takes off his jacket and you see the suspenders, it is go time. And he was able to tell us exactly where it was coming. We knew, and I had a 1 and a 2-year-old. I couldn't hold both my babies. And we were able to get to safety, but only in seconds time. So making sure that we have the proper radar and making sure that we're able to warn people and give them that opportunity. I thank God every day that I'm here. I thank God that my children are able to be here and live the American dream. And so I appreciate your commitment to this issue. It's personal to me, and I am really looking forward to working with you on it. So thank you.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. As Senator Shaheen knows, I'm more familiar with hurricanes in our part of the world. And I promise you, we'll work with more vigilance on this.
Thank you so much. And I also, on March 1st, 2007, a tornado hit my high school. And it's the community in which I lived. My mother was there. My sister had just been checked out. My cousins were there. So obviously these storms and knowing how important it is to be warned in the proper amount of time is something we deal with, unfortunately, quite a bit in our state. So I appreciate your commitment, and I really look forward to working with you to make sure that we can keep as many people safe as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Britt. And let me just say, I can identify with that, having been in a tornado when we lived in Mississippi and was just there at the end of March when that outbreak hit Mississippi, and it hit about 10 miles from where we were visiting. So I understand exactly what you're saying and appreciate all of the work that the department is doing in that area. Madam Secretary, I know we have only a little bit more time, but I have a few other questions that I would like to ask in a second round. On the CHIPS implementation, one of the things that I have heard from a number of representatives of our allies is concern about how that gets implemented, and how do we encourage our allies to see that as an opportunity rather than a threat? They're particularly concerned about the Made in America provisions in it. And so can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing and what we can do to help address some of those concerns? Because clearly we are a lot stronger against our adversaries if we're all working together.
Yes. So obviously you're right. We need to work with our allies, and also there is some concern. I sent a team recently to Japan and to Korea to work with them, and I will be going to Europe in a few weeks, carrying the message of we need to work together. I can report to you that as a result of our increased reaching out to them, we're starting to have much better, results. In fact, I said before, the Korean delegation is in town today. We've had extensive conversations with them, with Samsung, with their companies, how to work together. Similarly with Europe, look, it is something we have to work on, but here's the reality. If we all invest, Korea has the K-chip, EU has the EU Act, Spain, et cetera, if we all invest in the same area and have a glut of one kind of chips and not enough of another, if we compete against each other, I think everyone's starting to realize, we all lose.
Right.
So I actually feel quite a bit more optimistic as I sit here with you today than even 3 months ago, because we have been doing a huge amount of engagement, the White House, my office, et cetera, and I think we're making headway.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I would encourage you to advise members of this committee and others who are traveling overseas about the progress that you're making, because we sit in a lot of those meetings. We have an opportunity to talk to people, and it's a way for us to help spread that message and see how we can support the work that's going on.
Great idea.
NOAA is currently undergoing a National Facilities Strategic Plan to assess the agency's full facility needs and the future footprint. I would like to work with you going forward to ensure that the agencies can continue to make progress, and in particular, I'd like to work with you on a NOAA Center of Excellence in New Hampshire as called for in the Northeast Regional Plan, potentially in conjunction with the new Hydrographic Mapping Center of Excellence that Congress funded in fiscal year 2023. So will you commit to me that you're willing to do that?
Yes.
And we can work on that going forward?
Yes.
Finally, several years ago, the move of the Office of Space Commerce from DOD to the Department of Commerce was quite a contentious issue. There was a lot of debate around that. Can you tell the committee what progress has been made in moving that and how you see the future of that office in the Department of Commerce?
Yeah. I think we're making quite good progress. We've elevated it within NOAA, reporting, right up to Dr. Spinrad. We have a new director, Rich Dalbello, who's quite excellent. We have we've hired a great number of people, and I would say very good progress. Some of the appropriation we're asking for is for the new tracking system, which we believe will be up and running next year. And as the congestion in space increases quite significantly, that tracking system will be all the more important. So if you or your team wants a more detailed briefing, I'm happy to do that. But I would say in the past 18 months, I feel quite good about all our progress.
Great. I think we would very much like to get
we'll do it.
a briefing.
We'll do it.
And finally, one of the challenges that we hear from the fishing industry in New Hampshire is how we train the next generation of the fishing industry. There's a great organization, the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance, that has worked in New Hampshire to connect young fishermen with those who are more experienced. But can you talk about what NOAA can do to help remove some of the financial barriers that prevent young people from succeeding in fishing?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So as you say, there is that initiative. NOAA anticipates awarding $1 to $2 million of the federal money for probably 4 or 5 awards, which will develop workshops and services to help fishermen find career paths, get into the career path, figure out how to make a living. The proposals were due to us February 15th. We have all the proposals, and I expect we'll be making the grants later this year.
Good. Do you know if any of those are going to New England?
I don't, but I will find out.
Okay, thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Raimondo, it's great to see you, and just want to add my thanks to you for your leadership in carrying out the CHIPS and Science Act, which without question is a critical investment in our competitiveness and national security. But as I have spoken to you before, a core part of the legislation is onshoring the U.S. supply chain for mature semiconductor chips to lower prices for consumers, create jobs, and ensure that we're prepared for future disruptions that we certainly saw during the COVID-19. There's no better example, in my mind, for the need for this than the automobile supply chain. You know, during the pandemic and afterwards, American auto companies saw supply chains cut off. When you were in Michigan, we talked about this. You saw cars lined up in parking lots all ready to be delivered to customers, except they were missing a chip or two, and therefore couldn't be delivered, and that ended up with higher prices. Used car markets went up, really significant disruption from mature chips, not the highly advanced ones, but the mature ones. And that's why I authored and fought for a provision in the CHIPS and Science Act that sets aside $2 billion to bring supply chain for automotive grade mature chips that we also use in our military systems as well as medical devices, as you well know. So I'm glad that see your department has made that one of your strategic priorities as well. But with that in mind, I have just a couple of questions for you. First off, Madam Secretary, can you share what steps you're taking to ensure that the CHIPS Act incentives are not exclusively claimed by leading-edge chip manufacturers, while mature nodes that we need in automobiles and other everyday products stay offshore?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. Thank you for your advocacy on this. The CEO of Ford told us that last year, employees of Ford, I think it may be in one of their facilities in Michigan or in the Midwest, only worked a full week twice in the year because of lack of chips. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't even, for example, put the windshield wipers together.
Right.
So it's unbelievable. As you say, there's a $2 billion set aside for legacy. We have put out a strategy paper, which is public, I'm happy to get it to you, suggesting that we think that there will be multiples of $2 billion invested in mature and legacy, you know, $8+ billion into that area. We've put out our funding application. We've received over 200 statements of interest from many from legacy providers. We're in constant contact with medical device companies, car companies, et cetera. So we'll stay in touch with you. Everything I've said, you know, will be public and available to you. But I think I can confidently say it will be much more than $2 billion, and we're looking at it very carefully.
Well, that's encouraging. That sounds great, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. And I'd also like to discuss a long-standing priority of mine, the Great Lakes Center of Expertise for Oil Spill Preparedness and Response. It's located in part at NOAA, at the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory in Ann Arbor. The Great Lakes is more than just an economic engine and an ecological treasure. It's basically in the DNA of Michiganders, and an oil spill in the Great Lakes would, without question, be absolutely catastrophic for Michigan, for the economy, and 40 million people who rely on the Great Lakes for drinking water. So we need to be doing everything we can to protect them for future generations. That's why I led legislation establishing the center, which was signed into law in 2018, and have secured funding to establish it. The center will play a vital role in these efforts by examining the impacts of oil spills in freshwater environments, which is something we don't really fully understand. We're a whole lot better at cleaning up oil in saltwater, but there are microorganisms that exist in saltwater that don't exist in freshwater, a whole host of challenges associated with freshwater cleanup. So my question for you, Madam Secretary, is can I get your commitment to work with me to continue to secure funding for this important work that NOAA is doing in the Great Lakes, and to protect not just the Great Lakes, but all freshwater ecosystems as oil gets transported, whether it's by ship or a pipeline or train or truck, all presents a potential threat to freshwater systems.
Yes. We have, as you know, an excellent partnership with the Coast Guard in this respect, and we want to continue to work with the Coast Guard, and yes, continue to advocate for more funding.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much for all your accommodations. Secretary, thank you for yours, and I don't think I'll be long. Last year, you and I spoke about a pilot accession program for NOAA. Congress had appropriated funds in the last 2 fiscal years. We've been working with NOAA on this issue to ensure that NOAA has the proper authorization to make that vision a reality. We've been working to try to get pilots to NOAA, including Hurricane Hunter pilots. And I just wanted to reconfirm that you continue to support legislation that would authorize NOAA to designate one or more of these centers to facilitate the development and recruitment of aviators for NOAA.
Yes, and yes, we need it. And last year, I think we were able to train 8 or 10. We're on path to do 10 this year and want to do 10 or more each year to come, pilots. So, yes.
Thank you for that answer. At 4:30, the Commerce Committee is having a classified briefing with the, I assume, folks from the Department of Commerce. The topic of that classified briefing is foreign adversaries' exploitation of America's data from social media platforms, data brokers, and other companies. The Department of Commerce has become front and center in the efforts to secure our privacy. I think I've been working on privacy legislation for seemingly, I don't know, it's hard to say a decade. It's not that long, but a long time. But I think it's become something more than just personal privacy, which is hugely important. It's now become national security, and I wanted to give you the chance to indicate how you see the role of the department. I also am a sponsor and wanted to just, I don't know your answer if you have one to this question, but I thought it would be interesting to me to know what you're thinking. I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that's led by Senator Warner and Senator Thune called the Restrict Act. It is legislation that addresses the ongoing threat posed by technology from foreign adversaries attempting to empower your department to review, prevent, and mitigate information communications and technology transactions that pose an undue risk to our national security. Ask for your informal thoughts on that legislation, if you know it specifically, or that concept in legislation, including what your thoughts are about the underlying threats that we face, and legislation, does this legislation provide sufficient authorities for the department to mitigate? If you don't know the legislation, then what do you need?
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
So much there to cover. Thanks you for the efforts for the privacy law. We really need a privacy law in this country. And so anything I can do to be of help in making that happen on a bipartisan basis, count me in. I am somewhat familiar with the Restrict Act, and I think it is an excellent approach. Currently, the Department of Commerce is acting pursuant to an executive order to secure our communications and technology networks. And we are right now in the process of hiring a team to do monitoring, investigation, and enforcement. It would be better if that were codified in a law. And so I will support work in a bipartisan way, work with you, work with Senator Warner, Senator Thune to make that happen. I think it is a top priority, and we need to move with urgency. There's a lot of focus on, one particular company or a few particular companies that may infringe on America's privacy, steal our data, purvey false information. It's more than one company, and it is a constant, pervasive threat, and we need the permanent tools, properly funded with expertise, investigation, and enforcement ability, enabled permanently by statute, not an executive order, at the Department of Commerce. So I think it's necessary, and I'll work with you on it.
Secretary, your competence may involve the fact that so many responsibilities are coming to the Department of Commerce these days. So best wishes. Thank you for...
Best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran. I said I didn't have any more questions, but I just have a final brief one, and that is, you said you're going to be meeting with the Trade and Technology Council next week. Do you think we should...
It's in a few weeks. Get me the date. Yeah.
Do you think we should codify the Trade and Technology Council? Would that be helpful? And
I need
should
to
there be
think
some
about that.
funding provided? Would you?
Possibly.
Please?
I need to think for a minute on that. I will tell you, we're making great progress. The focus of our next meeting will be around semiconductors, semiconductor collaboration. We've talked a lot about export controls. It's exactly what you said. We need a formal mechanism to coordinate with our allies on issues of technology. So let me
Sure. I
think
would
more
appreciate your
properly and come back
thinking
to you.
about that. Well, thank you very much. If there are no further questions this afternoon, senators have until Wednesday, May 3rd, to submit additional questions for the official hearing record. We would ask that the department respond to those questions within 30 days. And hearing no further discussion, the subcommittee stands in recess until Wednesday, May 10th, when we will hold a hearing on the budget requests of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Drug Enforcement Administration. Again, thank you very much, Madam Secretary. The hearing is closed.